Okay, right. So welcome to the Russian Revolution Revision Guide. Okay, so there's a series of lessons, of modules here. There's 18 in total. Each one comes with a literacy written task to do at the end that we just demonstrate. So I can quickly show you. So here you go, there's slide one. And then there's the first few all have like a keyword matchup. And then it goes on. We develop into close activities for you to do. Then we move on to, where are we? Point evidence explain paragraphs. We need to rearrange them and sort them into the correct order. And then we have some writing tasks using the Pika paragraph format, which you can see just there. But we'll cross those bridges when we get to them. First of all, then we need to talk about Russia. Okay, at the start of the course, start of your revision, if you're using this as a revision guide, and we need to know a little bit about Russia. Well, first of all, let's take a look. Look at the map there. The big purple blob is Russia, one of the biggest countries in the world. By landmass, it is absolutely ginormous. So big that people don't really know what continent it fits in. It's a little bit in Europe, and the rest of it seems to dominate the northern half of Asia. So it's humongous. Things to remember about Russia is that the top half of this is mostly ice, frozen. The word is tundra as well. You've got sort of the Arctic Circle here where it really is ice and icebergs. And then you've got this whole sort of like ribbon, this band of land here, which is tundra, which is basically frozen grasslands. Those things, incidentally, are actually defrosting thanks to climate change and are releasing tons of methane and CO2 into the atmosphere, thereby accelerating climate change. So something to be wary of. It also means that in about 50 years' time, Russia's going to have some of the best farmland in the world, just in that little band there. But what we need to understand about Russia then is it's very vast and it's not that well populated. Most of the major cities are in the west of the country over here. And the big two that you need to know about are Moscow and St. Petersburg. St. Petersburg is that little dot there, and Moscow is that little dot there. Moscow being the capital city today, but it wasn't the capital city. It used to be St. Petersburg. So that's the geography of Russia settled out. Let's look at the kind of government. You've got the Romanov family, and that's the ruling family, the royal family of Russia. And they call their royals Tsars, okay, spelt T-S-A-R, but the way I pronounce it is basically Z-A-R or Z-A-R, Tsar, right? And this Romanov family have been controlling Russia for 300 years. Yeah, they're very well established. Internationally, very few people question the fact that the Romanovs are in charge of Russia. That's their territory. The current king, when we start our course, the current Tsar, in 1905, is called Nicholas II. Okay, his father, very famous leader in Russia, and then this is his son. He was a devoted family man. Okay, loved his family. We'll go on and look at those at a later module, later lesson. However, he was very, very, what you might call traditional. Okay, he's an old school leader. He was the Tsar. People should basically just shut up and do what they are told. That was his mindset. And people said that he was very autocratic, this word here. Okay, it's also one of the key words for today, an autocrat. Basically, he didn't believe there should be any negotiation or discussion. He didn't really believe that he should be listening to that many people. He'd make his mind up. You should do it. No questions asked. So that was his style of government. And that style of government didn't fit very well with what was taking place in Russia at the time, because lots and lots of people were very, very unhappy in Russia. Let's look at these four different categories. We can break the Russian people down into four different categories. We've got kind of like a class-based categorization here. We've got peasants, yeah, bless them, at the bottom of the pyramid. If you think of a class pyramid, you've got the peasants at the bottom, you've got the industrial workers probably somewhere in the middle, and the middle classes somewhere to the top, okay, of this sort of class pyramid. So we're going to break it down by these three categories here: peasants, industrial workers, middle classes. And then we've got other nationalities, because look what we're calling this thing here. We're not calling it Russia, we're calling it the Russian Empire. That means that there are lots of other different groups and nationalities inside Russia. Now, that's true, because if you look at that purple blob, like we did at the start, if you're really smart, you can see that actually there are huge chunks of that today are actually different independent countries. Okay, you've got all the stands over here, okay, in Central Asia. They are being sort of gobbled up by the Russian Empire. Over here, you've got states like Armenia and Georgia, and Azerbaijan, and all those places here. They're all coloured in purple, but in today's world are independent countries. And perhaps very importantly for what goes on to happen over the next 100 years, in Eastern Europe, you've got lots of countries that basically don't exist in 1905. Big chunks of Poland are controlled by the Russians. You've got what are called the Baltic states. Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, just here, they are all part of the Russian Empire. Ukraine, that is being part of the Russian Empire. Places like Moldova, they're all gobbled up as well. And quite interestingly, and perhaps one you might not expect, is you've got Finland there, which is also part of the Russian Empire at this time. So you've got lots of different nationalities, all being led by this one autocratic Tsar Nicholas II. So let's have a quick look and see why the people are generally unhappy with him. Tell you what, let's start on this side. Let's go backwards. Let's start on the right and work our way left. Certainly with other nationalities anyway. Let's start there first, because we just mentioned them. Think about it. Think about the things I've just said. You've got Ukrainians living under Russian rule. Estonians living under Russian rule. These guys have their own languages. They have their own cultures. They have their own histories. And they're being controlled by somebody else. The Central Asia, you've got people that are ethnically different, religiously different. Many of the guys in Central Asia are Muslim. The people in Moscow are Christian, Orthodox Christian. That's not a happy mix. You know, people, especially when things are going badly, people don't like being led by other people. They think we'd be far better off if we could control our own countries, if Ukrainians could control Ukraine, if Estonians could control Estonia, if the Finns could control Finland, the world would be a much better place. So these groups of nationalities would think. So there's lots of independence movements, lots of chunks of the Russian Empire that want to break away and become their own country and be in charge of their own destiny. And so these independence movements are growing under the rule of Tsar Nicholas II, and his refusal to even listen to their arguments that they should have more control over their areas, just makes things even worse. He could have listened to them. He could have said, right, fine, tell you what, I will give you some more powers over how money is spent in your areas, or I will officially recognize your languages or your religions. Doesn't do any of that. And so he sort of, with a lot of things in history, the metaphor we like is a pressure cooker. Yeah? Imagine Russia's like a pressure cooker. That pressure's building and building and building and building and building and building. And Tsar Nicholas is the lid, trying to keep that lid on things. So the independence movement is more pressure on that cooker lid. It's a toxic brew ready to explode at any moment. Let's look at the other three categories then. The Russians, right. One thing to understand about Russia, and this comes hugely important later, is that 85% of the people were peasants. Lived on the farm, basically only grew enough food really to feed themselves and their families, and if they were lucky to have a little bit left to sell at market. It was medieval, basically, right? We're talking about a medieval economy. in 1905 when the rest of Europe has industrialized. Yeah. So Russia is very, very behind most of Europe, which is also very important because many of the Russians, especially those that live around St. Petersburg and Moscow, consider themselves to basically be European. So they compare themselves to their European neighbors. They compare themselves to the great powers of Europe, to Britain, to France, to Germany. And they look at them and they go, oh, we're way behind where they are. And so this is the situation that Russia's in. Most of the countryside, most of the people are still peasants working in a medieval style economy. And to make matters worse, it's not working. They're starving. They're not actually producing enough food. So you've got lots and lots of people in the countryside that are starving. Right. Not good. Move on to the next situation. I've just said to you that Russia is not industrialized in the way that the other big economies have. They're trying to. In St. Petersburg, in Moscow, there is a growing... interruption there. Industrial workers. So, like I said, St. Petersburg, Moscow, you're beginning to have factories being built up, and those factories obviously need to have industrial workers. But the workers in the cities are suffering terrible pay and have terrible conditions, much like many industrial workers did throughout Europe during the Industrial Revolution. But remember, Russia is attacking or going through the Industrial Revolution at a slower pace, and arguably 50 to 100 years later than other countries like Britain did in Europe. And so Britain, for example, found the Industrial Revolution difficult, with workers not very happy with the conditions and the pay that they were receiving. And so they had to do reforms to their political system, reforms to the economic system in order to make the people happier with what was going on. Russia hadn't done that and was very unlikely to do that with this autocrat Nicholas II in charge. So you understand, you've got these industrial workers hitting peak unhappiness just at this particular time, around 1905. And they need reform, they need change, they want change, just like happened in the other Indo-European countries. But Nicholas II is preventing that from happening. And then finally, you've got the middle classes. Now, these are the kind of, we've kind of touched upon this, right? Well, middle classes, these are the intellectuals, the academics, the people that have been to university, the professionals, and they're able to look out across Europe and see that, like I said, their British, their French, their German counterparts are living much happier lives in much more stable, prosperous countries. And they're jealous. They think that they're European. They compare themselves to Europeans, and they realize, oh, if we are European, then we're like the poor cousin of Europe because everyone else is so far ahead. And so they're getting jealous and they're getting angry. And quite frankly, they're just embarrassed. And they don't want to be embarrassed anymore. They want to hold their head high in Europe and say, we're the Russians and we're just as advanced and as developed as anybody else. And so one of the things they're particularly keen for is a modern style of government where you have a constitution that limits the power of the Tsar. At this time, France has a constitution with a functioning democracy. Okay, not many people can vote, but it's still a functioning democracy. Britain has got a democracy. Again, not many people can vote, and women can't vote at all, but it's a functioning democracy with a constitution which says the king can only do this, this, and this. And then we have Britain has a parliament with elections and a prime minister, and they are the guys that make the real decisions on a day-to-day basis. Not Russia. Russia is still medieval in the sense that it has a king and nothing, basically, right? A few advisors, and that's basically it. That's embarrassing. Middle classes don't want to be medieval. They want to be modern, and so they want a modern style government. So you've got all these things going on, right? I've been talking a lot at length. I'll try and keep the videos to a shorter duration for the rest of the course, rest of the revision. But these are the four things to think about. You've got the peasants, they're starving. You've got the industrial workers, they are not being paid very well and the conditions are terrible. Middle classes, they're embarrassed to be Russian and they want a constitution. And then you've got the other nationalities inside Russia that are desperate for their own independence, to be free from Russia And who do they have in charge to see Russia through this very dangerous, complex, delicate period in their history? A very stubborn man in Nicholas II who refuses to listen and to accept advice or to compromise. So you've got the ingredients here for a car crash. That's pretty much what happened.